Right. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through the 6-step process that I use whenever I set up a new client inside the Aesthetic Athlete. And then you can go and use it for yourself so you can set yourself up for your own success when it comes to your physical results. And if you're new here, I'm Blair. I'm an online coach that specializes in helping people build lean athletic bodies so they can do the stuff they want to do without second guessing themselves. So if your goals are related to losing body fat so you can actually see your abs, building some more muscles so you can fill out those sleeves, or just improving your general fitness and strength so you can do cool shit and your body's not going to hold you back from doing what you want to do, then listen up because this is definitely for you. Before we dive in, I just want to make it super clear that what I'm going to talk you through today is what I do with my one-to-one clients. This is part of the Aesthetic Athlete. We also have the JAX program, which is a group-based program. Now that one, as soon as you join, you get access to amazing coaches, you get a nutrition plan, and you get the group training program that you can crack on with immediately. Aesthetic Athlete is different because we tailor and custom everything to the individual that we are working with to ultimately help them build their lean athletic body and achieve their specific goals. So that's the one I'm going to be talking you through today. Step 1 is the consultation. So you're probably wondering, yeah, but like, how do I do a consultation with myself, Blair? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm about to tell you. Basically, the whole point of doing a consultation from my perspective as the coach to then set up the plan is just to get a better understanding of where this person is at, what their goals are, so we can actually start piecing the plan together. So for me, I typically do these consultations on Zoom so I can actually kind of chat to this person, at least sort of virtually, in real time. And essentially, I look to cover 3 areas, right? I look to cover number 1, where they're currently at. What does their training currently look like? What does their nutrition currently look like? What are they not so happy with when it comes to their physique, their performance? Kind of like, why are they wanting to go about making improvements in these areas? And I get a really detailed idea of where they're at right now. And in my head, I think of that as I'm trying to find out what's this person's point A, right? Where are they right now? From there, I then want to look forward and I'll speak to the person about what the goals are. Like, what are we actually trying to achieve? What does that look like? What is some tangible things that we can measure to know if we've achieved that goal, and even just some more general things as well, right? And I typically will split these over, okay, let's think about 12 months time. Where do you want to be? And then let's break that down. And then over the next 12 weeks, where do you want to be? So after I've done that, I haven't established, okay, this is where we are and this is where we want to be. Now, I just want to figure out a way that we can start connecting those 2 places together. And that's essentially what I start doing. We'll talk back and forth with the individual about, okay, here's what I think we need to do in order to get from these points. We need to go through, a fat loss phase for this many weeks, a reverse diet for this many weeks, into a gaining phase for this many weeks, or a performance phase, or depending on what the goals are for that individual. So if you were doing this for yourself, then it's really important that you really determine by yourself, right, where am I now? What does these things look like when it comes to training, nutrition, physique, performance? And then what do I want them to look like? What's the end point I'm trying to get to? From there, what are the phases that I need to go through to get from point A to point B? And then for me, the last thing I'm looking to do in a consultation is just get commitment from both sides, because at the end of the day, it's my job to give these people the best plan I can possibly give them to help them get to their point B, get to their goals. But at the end of the day, they're the ones, and you are the one on the other end of this video that has to execute that plan, right? If I could go and lift the weights for the guys and eat the food for the guys, then I would love to do that because I love this shit. But unfortunately, I can't. So it's important that we find out the point A, the point B. We start putting together a rough plan in place to connect those dots. But ultimately, we're both ready to put in the work required to actually get there. So that is the whole point of the consultation, and that's step 1. Step 2 is the onboarding process. So the onboarding is pretty much just there to get the client up to speed on exactly how everything works inside the Aesthetic Athlete. There is also one very important part that is the questionnaire, right? And this is where it kind of just gives them a chance to put everything down in writing after what we've discussed in the consultation, and also in case we did miss anything that they've then remembered afterwards, they can obviously put it in there. Once I've received that questionnaire back from them, I then get to work, and this is where you can get to work for yourself. So the first thing I typically do will be I'll write their training program, right? Now we will have already discussed in their consultation, and I'll see from their questionnaire, how many times they're actually able to train per week. And my general recommendation is I'll usually ask everybody this, and you can kind of ask yourself the same question. I say, look, what's like a realistic number of times that you can train per week? And I'll give options of 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. Most people will say 3 to 4 times a week, right? Which is cool. Now, whatever answer somebody gives, I always start with the lower option. So if someone says 3 to 4 sessions per week, I would always say, cool, well, let's start off with 3. Once you prove to me you can nail 3 sessions for 4 weeks in a row, essentially the first month, then we can move up to 4. Same thing if someone says 4 to 5, I'll start them on the 4 sessions, so on and so forth. So I will then start the programming. I'll know, okay, this person I know is going to be starting off on, let's say, 4 sessions per week. I'll kind of use one of the sort of like general templates that we have, and then start kind of building off that skeleton to make it very appropriate for that individual client. Because when it comes to programming, there's certain principles that we have to abide by, right? Like we have to have progressive overload, we have to have a certain amount of rest and recovery built into the program. There's obviously a lot of movements that a lot of people do because they should be doing them. So what we have is a lot of kind of templated programs that then whichever one best suits that individual, we can then mold exactly to them. So if someone's coming to me specifically for, let's say they want to kind of build that lean athletic physique overall, but maybe they've got some body weight to lose to begin with before they're moving into a gaining phase, then I know that they're going to be much, much more suited to one of the styles of programmings we have, which is a bit higher volume that kind of pairs very well with the fat loss, because it's just kind of burning a bit more calories. So we're doing maybe a few more sets, a few extra reps of different movements, so high volume overall and higher intensity. So each session might not necessarily be taking longer, but they'll be getting more work done in that session, right? Whereas, just to kind of give you the counter example to that, if somebody's main goal was, for example, just to get as strong as they possibly could, and it wasn't so much based around aesthetics, then we would be doing probably a lot lower volume in the actual session, but a lot higher intensity in terms of really touching those top percentages, but long rest periods and lower reps per set, things like that. So anyway, moving on. For me, it's using the information from the consultation to make sure that the program we're designing for this individual is as specific as it needs to be to get them the result that they want. Once we've got their actual training program set up, I'll then set them up on my sort of client system, and that is something that I set them up with their own little client hub, which is kind of have all their information in one place. So if you were doing this for yourself, I would just make sure that you have, even if it's just like a note on your phone that just has all the information that you need all in one place. So you always know, right, cool, this is what my targets are going to be off the bat that I'm aiming for. This is somewhere that I can actually track this information, so I can actually see what might need changed and when. But I'm going to talk more about that later in the video. So that was step 2, which is essentially getting this client onboarded, writing their training program, and setting up their coaching hub so that all their information is in one place that we can both look at whenever we need to. Step 3, send the plan. So once I have set up everything on my end, I will then do a pretty decent length video just kind of explaining to the individual, right, based off of everything we've spoken about so far, from the consultation, from the questionnaire, and any extra chats we've had in the time in between, here is the plan that I've put together for you in terms of all the training I want you to start doing, what I want you to be doing with your nutrition right off the bat, how the check-ins are going to work, when they're going to actually check in, what data I want them to be tracking, literally just talking through A to Z, absolutely everything, so that when they're going into their first week of their program actually starting, they know exactly what they need to be doing. Because I think that is a huge part of what my job is as a coach, is to make sure that I'm communicating exactly what I want all my guys to be doing, right? Because there's so much different information out there. There's just an absolute abundance of, some of it's good, some of it's terrible, right? And I honestly think a big part of my job as a coach is to kind of tell people, like, look, don't worry about all this. I want you to focus on this, right? This is what I'm telling you to do. All the extra noise, even though some of it might be very accurate and very true, And you know, based on studies, it's like it's not important for you right now. Do this. This is what I want you to focus on. So that's kind of the whole point of me sending them their plan and talking through it in detail, but not so much detail that it's off-putting, right? So just giving them what they need to know when they need to know it. And that's kind of the whole point in that step. So for yourself in this one, it's kind of like when you have set yourself up with the plan that you've just created for yourself, the program you've made and the nutrition strategies you're going to be following, then what you need to do is make sure that, right, how do I break this down into things that I can do either every day or every week that I know if I tick these boxes will start pushing me towards that goal. Because if you only know the big picture things and you only know, right, this is my whole plan, this is where I want to get to, that's definitely better than not knowing. But if you haven't broken that down into, cool, this is what I need to do daily, weekly, then it's going to be very difficult for you to know if you're actually making progress or not. So make sure that at this stage in the process, you are very, very clear on what needs done every single day, every single week to actually start making progress towards that big goal. Step 4 is tracking the first week. So by this point, the client is ready to go. They have their training program, they have their initial nutrition strategies, and they have their walkthrough of what I want their first week to look like. So during this first week, I ask everyone to track certain pieces of data. And this can generally will be the same main pieces for everyone, but there might be a few additional pieces, or I might take away some bits and pieces if it's not necessary for certain individuals. So the whole point of getting them to track this during their first week is because, you know, this whole coaching process of getting someone from A to B, from, you know, their starting point to eventually building their own athletic physique we have to understand there's always going to be some trial and error involved, and we're not going to know what we need to change and when if we're not tracking the right data. So it's really important that we are keeping track of it all. And what I do is I'll get each of the guys to fill in their tracker pretty much every single week. And as I say, it can maybe differ in terms of how much detail we go into, but it just means that we're actually monitoring what is happening, what's coming in, what's going out, how they're feeling, how that's affecting not just their performance, but even just like their mood and their energy levels and all that good stuff. So we can actually have a very accurate representation of what we need to change and when. And we pride ourselves on being very data driven with all of this, because it probably is quite a big ask of me to get a lot of the guys to track some of the data that we do ask. Like, some of it can be a little bit of a ball ache from time to time. But it just kind of allows me to then serve the guys even better, because it means that we're not just changing things for the sake of changing things, and, you know, because somebody gets bored of this or they just don't want to do this anymore. It's like, well, but that evidently seems to be something that's working really well for us, so let's keep it going, let's narrow down, let's make sure, like, you know, we need to remain disciplined with this stuff and double down on the things that are working well. And likewise, if we notice that something is slipping or something isn't serving us as well as what it possibly could, then we can see that way more in advance before it would become a bigger problem. So ultimately, having a tracking system like this means that we don't let anything slip through the cracks, right? So if you're doing this for yourself, I would highly recommend you track at least these next few things I'm going to cover, which is, first of all, your body weight, right? Like, the easiest thing you could possibly track: weigh yourself every single morning, first thing in the morning, after you've been to the toilet, before you've eaten anything, before you've drank anything, before you've had a shower, all that stuff. Like, don't even have a sip of water, jump on the scales, because that's going to be the easiest situation that you can replicate each morning. Yes, of course, some days you can have had less sleep than others, you might have finished your dinner later one night than others, but generally speaking, first thing in the morning is the best time to weigh yourself. That number, you want to be tracking that pretty much on a daily basis to see how it's actually changing. You also want to be tracking how many calories you're taking in on a daily basis. So tracking your food so that you know how that is then corresponding to what your body weight is doing. I'd also recommend tracking your protein intake, pretty much just to make sure that you're definitely eating enough of it, but you can always kind of play around and say, right, let's try maybe eating considerably more and see if I feel any better off the back of it. But protein for me is definitely one that I would advise you tracking to kind of see if you can pick up any changes over time based off how much protein you're actually eating. I feel like this goes without saying, but you should definitely be tracking the training that you're doing. Like, if you have a training plan that you're following, you should be tracking, you know, the weights you're lifting, the number of sets you're doing, the number of reps you're able to complete on a weekly basis, just so we can actually be sure that when you go into the gym, you can give yourself the best possible chance of progressively overloading each and every movement. So definitely track your training. Another one I'd recommend is tracking your steps, and I like to kind of just use this as almost like a proxy for your general activity level, right? Because if you're somebody who is generally very active, maybe you walk to and from work a decent distance every single day, maybe your work is actually you're on your feet, I don't know, you're a barber, you work in a restaurant or whatever it is, right? Like you're on your feet quite a lot, you're walking around. If you then all of a sudden had a bit of a shift, or maybe you left that job, you started something new, you moved to an office job or whatever it is, or you started driving to work, then your general activity level could actually come down quite a lot, which would have a pretty decent impact on, you know, your physique based, if nothing else were to change. So to me, it's important that we track that, as I say, just to have an idea of where your general activity level is at. And then lastly, when it comes to just things that I would find useful to track, I would say if you are just doing any sort of extra activity throughout the week, like whether that's just kind of going for any extra runs or doing like a class here or there, whatever it is, like make sure you are kind of factoring that into your plan as well. Because again, if you start doing a lot of extra activity throughout the week, then, you know, that's going to have an impact on, you know, how much food you should be eating, the recovery, how much recovery time you should be taking, and, you know, potentially, you know, the results that you're going to be getting as well. So I would always make sure that you're tracking those things, if nothing else. Now, you could go into way more detail and track a lot of biofeedback markers, but I think for yourself, just cracking on with it at the moment, tracking those initial things are going to be really important, so you can start to notice patterns in terms of, oh, when I eat this many calories, you know, my body weight does this. When I eat this many calories, my body weight does that. Or, you know, when I train this many times a week, I notice that my, you know, my body weight moves down or up or whatever it is, right? So I would say definitely track those, because otherwise you're kind of just pissing in the wind as to what you should be changing and when. Step number 5 is completing the first check-in. So when it comes to check-in time, I basically ask all the guys to fill in their check-in form each and every week, and then I'll send them out their response based off of, you know, what needs changed and what doesn't need changed. Now, the first check-in itself always is a little bit more detailed, because this is where we start to look into the nitty-gritty parts of their nutrition and start to set things up a bit more. So funnily enough, and I say this to absolutely every client that comes in, like I don't actually give people nutritional targets or a meal plan in their very first week. I ask each and every one of them to track the food that they eat and to eat a sort of like healthy, normal diet for them. Now, the reason I do this is twofold, right? First of all, is because it would be so easy for me and also for you right now, and I'd probably recommend that you do this, to be fair, is just to go on any of the millions of online calorie calculators, plug in your details, and then get some information back in terms of this is how many calories you should be eating, this is how much protein, blah, 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 right? Which is all well and good, and it's very useful for a lot of us out there, and I will have a look at that sometimes, just to kind of see what kind of feedback I'm getting. But at the end of the day, if I were to go and do that, I feel like I'm doing myself and clients a disservice, because it doesn't let me use the, at this point, almost 8 years of just general nutrition and coaching knowledge I've gained over that time. So I would much rather have a look at what their diet looks, their normal healthy diet looks like for the week, and then make some adjustments off of that, off of how much calories I'm seeing them eating already, off of how much protein I'm seeing them eating already, and then set them more realistic targets, because often it can be a bit of an overhaul, right? For a lot of guys, their first week, you know, I'll tell them to eat a normal diet, but they'll end up eating hardly anything. They know they've maybe clearly been eating upwards of 3,000 calories pretty much every single day, and then all of a sudden I ask them to eat a week normally, and now they're eating closer to 1,500. So I have to kind of make a few guesstimations based off of, okay, I think like that's a bit extreme, we don't need to be going that low. So I'll set them a number based off of what I believe they should be eating to start getting some of the results we want to get. Same thing with protein. I think like when you put your numbers into these calorie calculators, typically it will give you a very high protein number, which ultimately we will probably try to get to for all the guys that I work with. But going from 80 grams of protein a day to 200 is a very fucking hard jump to make. So I'd rather set somebody a more realistic target of say 120, and then when they hit that, we start increasing it closer to that 200 mark, you know, on a weekly or sort of a bi-weekly basis. And the second reason I don't actually set the guys nutritional targets or meal plans in the very first week is because I would rather see what they eat for the week. So I'll go into their MyFitnessPal and I will have a quick look through their diary of what kind of foods they're already eating on a regular basis. And then I will give them meal suggestions based off what I'm already seeing them eat. Because I think it's very difficult to go from a complete nutritional overhaul in terms of calories, protein, and then the actual foods that somebody's eating. I would much rather that I kind of use the foods I'm already seeing them eating and then just make changes to some of the meals so that I know they're going to still enjoy the food they're eating. They've obviously enjoy it somewhat because they've chosen to eat it already. And I will then just make changes to make sure that we're getting enough protein in, we're sticking to the calories we need to. And yes, of course, I will add some foods in that I think they need, and I'll probably suggest that we take some foods out that might not be necessary as well. But that's the two main reasons why, during the first week, I would rather gain the data from the person to then allow us to make faster progress later on down the line without coming into these road bumps. So a lot of this first check-in is kind of covering off the details like that, and we actually set them what I call the big 5 targets. Now, these big 5 things I have actually already explained to you guys in the last step. So essentially, I'll set them a target for their calories, their protein, their training sessions, their steps, and any additional cardio I want them to do per week. And those are the big 5 sort of needle movers, I would say, that I really want them to focus on, every single day, every single week, making sure we tick these boxes so that we start making very good progress towards the big goal. So if you were doing this for yourself, then I'd recommend that during your very first week of trying to be on it and trying to make progress towards this goal is do exactly what I've said. Take a week and eat relatively normal for you, but make it like a healthy normal for you, and track all your food, right? Try and understand, right, so this is how many calories I'm typically eating on a daily basis. This is how much protein I'm typically eating on a daily basis. And then have a look at what your body weight is doing. And then if your body weight is actually already starting to trickle downwards, and that's what you want, and you're trying to lose body fat, then and you're not actually feeling too hungry off the back of that, then actually maybe you've made a pretty good guesstimation of where you need to be. And I would probably just keep at that sort of level until you feel like things start to slow down, and then maybe you need to tweak things. You can either increase your protein intake a little bit more, or you could decrease your calories a little bit more. You could add in some extra steps. You could add in some extra just sort of general cardio. You could add in an entire training session. It very much depends on what your schedule looks like and what's doable for you. But ultimately, if you were kind of doing your first sort of self-assessment check-in, then that's what I'd focus on. I'd focus on having had a week in the bank of data to have a look at, and then setting yourself some targets based off the review of that to then go ahead and start attacking. So the whole purpose of the first check-in for me when I'm setting up someone is to make sure that we now have a really good example week of like what things can look like. We then take that information, make some changes, set some targets to then go forward with, knowing that now we've just basically taken what might work and we've identified what has worked and we focus on those things rather than trying to keep everything super, super broad. Step 6 is do the work. So at this point, the client's fully set up and ready to go. We both have a very good idea of what we need to do. We know exactly the targets we need to hit. And we have a better idea at this point of how long it's going to take for this person to achieve the goal. So for yourself, at this point, it is literally a case of just doing the fucking work. Like, there's only so many things you can set up in advance. There's only so many different scenarios and situations and circumstances that you can plan for. Sometimes you just have to rinse and repeat and just do the same thing for a good amount of time until you can notice that maybe trends are happening with some of these factors that you're actually tracking. So at this point, it is literally entering into what I will often refer as the rinse and repeat phase. And if any of my clients are watching this, they'll definitely heard me say that quite a lot, whereby it's like, cool, things are working, things are going well, we can see it in the data, we can see it from feedback in terms of what you're telling me, things are going good, you're feeling good, now let's just keep the ball rolling until we need to change something. So to summarize this entire process for you guys, essentially what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a very clear idea of where you are now, where you want to get to. Then we're putting a plan in place to actually achieve that. The plan that we're putting in place is making sure you have a training program that supports where you want to go, and that you're tracking the right data that is going to allow you to determine whether you're actually going in the right direction. From there, you'll then be able to set yourself a nutrition plan based off of the data that you're already tracking. You may have to make a few tweaks to that based off of if you're not losing weight and that's the goal, you're going to need to decrease the amount of food you're taking in, or increase the amount of activity you're doing, or increase the amount of protein you're taking in, whatever the situation is. From there, you're then going to be just touching base, even if it's just touching base with yourself each and every week to make sure that you're taking 5 to 10 minutes to review the data, review how you're actually feeling, making sure you're making progress, maybe taking some progress pictures, and then from there, you're just rinse and repeating that process on a weekly basis. Because until you have done it for a good 3 to 4 weeks, you're not really gonna know if what you're doing is working. So you have to be patient and you have to be disciplined enough to keep going and check your data and understand where you need to make changes. So essentially that is the entire process I will go through with a client when they work with me one-to-one inside the Aesthetic Athlete. And hopefully I've given you enough information here that you can go and have a good crack at this on your own. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to drop me a comment here or drop me a message on Instagram, and I'll be happy just to give you some few pointers wherever I can. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Go and share it with someone who you think would benefit from it, and don't forget to subscribe.